Beneath a quiet green hill in central China lies an entire army that has stood guard, in the dark, for more than 2,000 years. Not a statue. Not a monument. An army. Thousands of life-sized soldiers made of clay, standing in battle formation underground, each one with a different face. And they are not the strange part. They are only the guards. What they were built to protect still sits, sealed and untouched, inside a hill that no one has dared to open. This is the Terracotta Army. And it belongs to the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang. For most of us, the ancient world is a handful of famous ruins. The pyramids. The Colosseum. Places worn smooth by millions of visitors. But here, under the fields near the city of Xi'an, is something stranger. A buried world, built for one man, that we have found, measured, and mapped, and then deliberately decided to leave closed. So sit with 3 questions. Who was so powerful that he could command an army of 8,000 clay soldiers to follow him into death? What exactly is hidden inside the sealed tomb at the center of it all, that ancient writers described as a buried universe of rivers and stars? And why, after 50 years, with all our modern technology, have we still not opened it? This is the story of the Terracotta Army, and the tomb of Qin Shi Huang that we still cannot open. Chapter 1. The First Emperor. To understand the army, you first have to understand the man it was built to serve. For most of its early history, the land we now call China was not one country. It was a battlefield of rival kingdoms, locked in centuries of war so relentless that the era has its own grim name, the Warring States period. Then, in the 3rd century before our era, one kingdom began to swallow the others. The kingdom of Qin. Its king was a man named Zheng. He was ruthless, brilliant, and impatient. One by one, his armies crushed the rival states, until by the year 221 before our era, for the first time in history, the whole of the Chinese heartland answered to a single ruler. And he gave himself a new title to match. Not king. Something greater. He called himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. Getting to that throne had nearly killed him more than once. As king of Qin, Zheng survived assassination attempts, including one famous plot in which a would-be killer hid a dagger inside a rolled-up map and lunged at him across the throne room. He lived. His enemies did not. That brush with death seems to have marked him. This was a man who trusted almost no one, who slept in different palaces so no one could be sure where he lay, and who came to believe that the only thing that could truly threaten him was time itself. What he did next reshaped a civilization. He swept away the old feudal lords and ran the empire through appointed officials. He standardized the money, the weights, the measures, even the width of cart axles so every wagon rolled in the same ruts. He forced the many rival scripts into one written language, a decision that helped bind China together for the next 2,000 years. And he linked and extended the walls of the old kingdoms into the first version of what would one day become the Great Wall. But holding this new empire together came at a staggering human cost. Qin Shi Huang ruled through fear, forced labor, and harsh law. Hundreds of thousands of workers were driven onto his walls, his roads, and his palaces. Scholars who defied him were silenced, and by one famous account, buried alive. He unified a world, and he buried a generation to do it. And there was one enemy even the first emperor could not conquer. Death. As Qin Shi Huang grew older, he became obsessed with living forever. He sent expeditions across the sea in search of a mythical elixir of immortality. He swallowed potions brewed by his court alchemists, tonics that, in a cruel irony, were often laced with mercury, the very poison that may have helped kill him. He was chasing eternal life, and drinking his own death. And when it became clear that immortality would not come, he did what powerful men have always done. If he could not escape death, he would rule the next world just as he had ruled this one. He would take his empire with him. And so, from almost the moment he took the throne, work had already begun on the largest tomb complex the ancient world had ever seen. An underground kingdom, with an army to guard it. Chapter 2. The Army of Clay. In March of 1974, a group of farmers digging a well in the dry fields east of Xi'an struck something hard. Not rock. Not water. A head. A human head, made of clay, staring up at them out of the earth. They had accidentally broken into one of the greatest archaeological finds in human history. Because that single head was not alone. Around it, and beneath it, stretching away underground in silent ranks, was the Terracotta Army. The scale is almost impossible to hold in your mind. So far, in the pits around the tomb, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of an estimated 8,000 soldiers. Infantry, archers, cavalry, and officers. Alongside them stand more than 130 war chariots and around 600 horses, all of it modeled in clay at full life size, and all of it arranged in genuine military formation, facing east, toward the lands the first emperor had conquered. And here is the detail that stops people cold. No two faces are the same. Walk the ranks of the Terracotta Army and you do not see one soldier copied 8,000 times. You see individuals. Different noses, different eyes, different expressions, different hairstyles knotted in different ways. Some look young and uncertain. Some look like hardened veterans. For a long time people wondered if each was a portrait of a real soldier in the emperor's army. The truth is more clever than that. The warriors were built on something close to an assembly line, more than 2,000 years before the modern factory. The bodies were mass-produced from a small number of standard molds. Legs, torsos, arms, and heads were made separately, in bulk, and then assembled like parts. But then, before firing, artisans added the faces and the fine details by hand, mixing and matching features from a kit of shapes, and sculpting each one to be subtly unique. It was mass production and individual craftsmanship, working together. A pre-industrial factory building an army of individuals. And the warriors do not stand alone or at random. They are organized into separate underground pits, each with its own purpose. The largest, Pit 1, is a vast rectangular hall the size of several football fields, packed with the main infantry in tight, disciplined columns. A smaller pit holds the cavalry and the war chariots, the mobile striking force. Another appears to be a command post, holding the higher-ranking officers, the brain of the army. Nearby, archaeologists found two exquisite half-size bronze chariots, each drawn by 4 horses and fitted with thousands of delicate parts, some of the finest ancient bronze work ever discovered. Whoever planned this did not build a crowd. He built a functioning army, with a front line, a reserve, and a chain of command, and then buried the whole thing intact. And there is a darker footnote. Not long after the first emperor died, his dynasty collapsed into rebellion, and the pits were broken into, looted of their real weapons, and set on fire. The wooden roofs burned and caved in, crushing many of the warriors. So much of what visitors see today is not just excavated, it is painstakingly reassembled, thousands of shattered figures pieced back together, fragment by fragment, like the largest jigsaw puzzle on Earth. And they were not the drab gray figures you see today. When they were first made, the entire Terracotta Army was painted in brilliant color. Red and green robes, blue and purple trousers, black hair, faces in lifelike flesh tones. Tragically, much of that paint, after 2,000 years underground, curls and flakes away within minutes of hitting the dry modern air. Some of the color has been lost almost the instant the warriors were uncovered. That single fact, that our air itself destroys them, is a clue to a much bigger decision waiting at the center of this site. Then there are the weapons. The soldiers were equipped with real, working bronze weapons. Swords, spears, crossbow triggers, and tens of thousands of arrowheads. And some of those bronze blades came out of the ground barely tarnished, still sharp, after more than 2,000 years. Studies found a thin layer of chromium on the surface of some of them, which fed an incredible story that the Qin had discovered chrome plating 2 millennia before modern industry. The current thinking is more cautious, that the chromium likely came from a lacquer used nearby rather than a deliberate rust-proofing. But the mystery of how these weapons survived so well is still not fully closed. Now step back and take in what this is. This vast clay army, with all its individual faces and real weapons, was never meant to be seen by a single living eye. It was sealed in the dark, forever, as a bodyguard for a dead king. And the Terracotta Army is only the outer defense. It stands guard, facing outward, around something. And that something is the real mystery. Chapter 3. Sealed Mountain. About a mile and a half west of the Terracotta Army pits rises a low, tree-covered hill. It looks like a natural feature of the landscape, a gentle green mound above the fields. It is not natural. It is the burial mound of Qin Shi Huang, and beneath it lies the one part of this entire complex that has never been opened. We are not guessing that something is down there. We know. And most of what we think we know comes from a single, extraordinary source. About a century after the emperor's death, a Chinese historian named Sima Qian wrote a description of the tomb. And it reads less like a report and more like a legend. He wrote that 700,000 laborers worked on the mausoleum. That the builders dug down through 3 layers of groundwater and sealed the chamber with bronze. That the ceiling was set with pearls and shapes to mirror the heavens, the sun, the moon, and the stars, so the dead emperor would lie forever beneath his own night sky. That the floor was shaped into a map of his empire, with the great rivers and the sea recreated in flowing mercury, kept moving by some hidden mechanism. And that the tomb was rigged with automatic crossbows, set to fire on anyone who broke in. And consider the human cost buried in that account. 700,000 laborers, if the number is even close to true, is the population of a large city, conscripted and worked for decades on a single grave. Construction is thought to have begun when Qin Shi Huang was still a teenage king and continued for around 38 years, right up to and past his death. Sima Qian also records a chilling final act. To keep the tomb's secrets, The craftsmen who knew the location of the traps and treasures were said to have been sealed inside when the outer gate came down, entombed alive with the emperor they served. The tomb was not just built for the dead. It may have been finished with the living. For a long time, this sounded like exactly what it appeared to be. A myth. A historian 100 years later, dressing up a dead tyrant's grave with rivers of quicksilver and a ceiling of stars. And then modern science took a reading. And the myth flinched. When researchers tested the soil of the burial mound, they found something they could not easily explain. The earth over the tomb carries unusually high concentrations of mercury, far above the levels in the surrounding land, and the highest readings cluster in a pattern that some have argued roughly matches the layout of rivers and the sea across ancient China. A poisonous echo, sitting in the ground, of exactly the mercury map that Sima Qian described 2,000 years ago. It does not prove every detail of the legend. But it means the ancient account was not pure fantasy. There really does appear to be mercury under that hill. Which forces a strange and thrilling question. If the historian was right about the rivers of mercury, what else was he right about? The bronze chamber? The star map ceiling? The traps? Underground surveys have mapped the shape of an enormous chamber deep inside the mound, a buried palace waiting in the dark. We have found the outer walls. We have measured the mercury. We have traced the rooms with instruments that never break the soil. We are standing, in effect, on the doorstep of the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, one of the greatest sealed rooms on earth. And we have chosen not to open the door. Chapter 4. Why we haven't opened it. This is the part that surprises people the most. We have the tomb. We have the technology to dig. And archaeologists are deliberately leaving it shut. The question is why? The first reason is written in flaking paint. Remember what happened to the Terracotta Army, how the brilliant colors curled off the warriors within minutes of meeting the modern air. Now imagine that happening to everything inside the emperor's tomb. Silk, wood, lacquer, paintings, and objects that have sat in a sealed, stable environment for over 2,000 years. The moment we break that seal, we start a clock we cannot stop. Everything we do not know how to preserve, we would be destroying by the simple act of looking at it. In archaeology there is a hard-earned rule. The best excavation is sometimes the one you do not do, because a site left buried can be dug by better hands in a better future. Once you open it, it is open forever. The second reason is the mercury. If Sima Qian was right, and the readings suggest he was at least partly right, then the sealed chamber may be flooded with, or surrounded by, dangerous quantities of a deadly poison. Opening it carelessly could release toxic mercury vapor, threatening the archaeologists, and the treasures, and the site itself. And the third reason is sheer scale and respect. The tomb complex around Qin Shi Huang is enormous, larger than many cities, and only a fraction of it has been explored. To excavate the central tomb properly would be the work of generations, demanding methods and preservation science that, in many cases, do not yet exist. So the decision has been made to wait. To guard the hill. To study it from the outside with radar and probes and soil samples, and to leave the emperor where he lies, sealed beneath his mercury rivers and his ceiling of stars, until the world is ready. Think about what that restraint really means. For thousands of years, the story of tombs and treasure has been a story of people breaking in. Grave robbers, treasure hunters, empires carrying off whatever they could pry loose. And here, at the greatest sealed tomb of them all, humanity has done something almost unheard of. It has found the door, and chosen to knock instead of break it down. Qin Shi Huang built all of this to command eternity. He wanted an empire in the next world and an army to defend it, and he wanted to be remembered forever. In a way we could never have predicted, he got his wish. Not because his elixirs worked. Not because his tomb was invincible. But because, 2,000 years later, we are still standing at the edge of his buried kingdom, unwilling to disturb it, telling his story to each other in the dark. The first emperor wanted to rule forever. He is still down there, under the hill, still guarded by his silent clay army, still keeping his secrets. And for now, we are letting him.